Good evening and welcome to the inaugural edition of ICG 2020's Development Dialogue. I am Pushkar, Director of the International Center Goa, or ICG as it is commonly known as. Today's program is a dialogue between Dr. R.A. Mashelkar and Dr. Anil Kakotkar, two great Indians of Goan origin. The discussion is on the broad theme of reimagining and reinventing post-COVID India, and is moderated by Mr. Dattaraj Salgaonkar, who is the Vice President of ICG. To begin with, I invite Mr. Yatin Kakotkar, President of ICG, for his brief introductory remarks. Thank you. Mr. Kakotkar.
Good evening and greetings from the International Center Goa. Thank you for joining the program. Even though we are only 1/5 into the 21st century, COVID-19 pandemic will be regarded as one of the great crises of the century. Some people, some experts feel that the pandemic will change the world in profound ways. COVID-19 pandemic is in-your-face crisis, leaving no option for people but to take notice and deal with it immediately. However, there are many other problems the world has to reckon with, but unlike the pandemic, they are relatively imperceptible in our day-to-day functioning. For example, raising the Human Development Index in South Asia, Africa, and the less developed nations of the world has been an intractable problem for decades. International trade, which has grown in the last 70 years and created prosperity for many countries in the world, many citizens of the world, is today under intense pressure from protectionist policies. Even before COVID-19 struck, India's growth rate was beginning to wobble and today is looking distinctly shaky. India needs to grow at 8 to 10% per annum for the next 10, 20 years if it has to eliminate poverty, raise the income levels, and provide employment for 125 million youth who are going to join the labor workforce in this decade. Climate change will be the biggest issue of the 21st century and the biggest problem of the 21st century. Looking at all these myriad issues and challenges, will the people of the world and the world leaders rise to the occasion and create a better future for us? Looking at however, there is an inspiring example from the 20th century when world leaders came together after World War II and created a better world. World War II was the big crisis of the 20th century, much greater than the COVID-19 pandemic. But the progressive shape the world took after World War II was neither preordained nor was it inevitable. It was the result of strategic decisions taken by wise statesmen of the time. Those who won the war did not humiliate the defeated. Japan, Europe were destroyed in the war, but America in its wisdom provided aid to these two economies and helped them rebuild. Desperate to prevent wars on the European continent, wise statesmen of some Western European nations came together and took the initial steps to build what is today the European Union. World leaders came together to create new global institutions to tackle the problems of the 20th century. They built the United Nations. They built the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, which later became the World Trade Organization. They built the International Monetary Fund. They built the World Trade Organization. Globalization and World Trade Organization united the world instead of dividing the world. And thanks to international cooperation and world trade, Asia, which was a relatively backward to Europe and America, today has grown in economic and political strength. This is not to say that there have been no problems in the last 70 years, but the world today is a much better place than it was in 1945. Coming back to the present moment, to the year 2020 and to the 2020 decade, what challenge does the COVID-19 pandemic present to the world and to India? What are the strategic challenges of the 21st century for the world and for India? And how do we deal with these problems? How do we reinvent existing global institutions that were built in the 20th century? And how do we create new ones in the 21st century to foster international cooperation on disease control, on trade, on climate change, on healthcare, on education? What needs to be done to shape the 2020s to make the world and India a better place for the rest of the century? It is to address these issues that the International Center Goa has developed a webinar program aptly called 2020's Development Dialogue. It is an ambitious series, and ICG has taken the initiative to invite eminent speakers, leaders, and from India and the world to deliberate the development issues of the 2020s. Today, ICG is pleased to launch the webinar series with a discussion entitled Reimagining and Reinventing Post-COVID India, featuring two eminent scientists. We will be having a second program in the month of January, which will feature Dr. Suresh Prabhu. Today, the discussion is being led by Mr. Dattaraj Salgaonkar, and it is my great privilege to introduce him. Mr. Salgaonkar is a vice chairman of VM Salgaonkar Corporation Private Limited. He has successfully led the business, the Goa-based group, to diversify into hospitality, real estate, and private equity. He's passionate about education and the arts, and his foundation runs schools and colleges in Goa in English and in local Konkani, including higher education from hospitality to a law college. He's a production engineer from VJTI Bombay University and an MBA from the Wharton Business School. He did the Sunaprant Goa Center for Arts in 2007, which focuses on arts-based community and pedagogical programming, which has transformed the Goan cultural landscape. Mr. Salgaonkar is a founder member of ICG and presently is our vice president. He chairs the ICG Programs Committee and has been the driving force behind our ICG Zoom webinar. I now hand over the discussion to Mr. Salgaonkar.
Thank you, Yatin, and a very good evening to all our distinguished audience and to all our eminent panelists. I'm going to introduce our speakers in brief and then dive deeply into the discussion. There are many things that are common between Dr. Anil Kakodkar and Dr. Raghunath Anant Mashelkar. Both are sons of Goa. Both have been honored by Goa and Maharashtra with their highest honors, namely Gobantha Vibhushan and Maharashtra Bhushan. Both have been honored by our nation with three of the highest civilian honors, namely Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, and Padma Vibhushan. Their own fields are different. Dr. Anil Kakodkar has worked in strategic area of atomic energy, whereas Dr. Mashelkar has worked in the civilian technology area. Dr. Kakodkar served first as a director of BARC and then as chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. Dr. Mashelkar served first as director of National Chemical Laboratory and then as director of CSIR. Their own paths and the national impact they had are different. Dr. Kakodkar is known globally for his amazing pursuit in denial-driven innovation. India was denied nuclear technology. It was denied uranium, but despite the restrictions imposed by all the foreign nations, Dr. Kakodkar's leadership has been responsible for India achieving a distinctive status as a country with advanced nuclear technology. Dr. Kakodkar was among the chosen few involved in the first nuclear explosion project that India did in 1974 at Pokhran. Again, he was able to get observer status for India at CERN and then exemption for nuclear trade from Nuclear Suppliers Group. Dr. Mashelkar is credited for path-breaking science himself as also being a great institutional transformer. His transformation of CSIR in the 90s being listed as the top 10 achievements in Indian science and technology of the 20th century. In recognition of his own pioneering research and contributions in polymer science and engineering, he has been honored with some of the world's highest honors, a Fellow of Royal Society, Foreign Fellow of US National Academy of Science, as also engineering, Foreign Associate of American Academy of Arts and Science, and Fellow of US National Academy of Inventors. He is the only scientist in India to have received all these honors. He won the TWS Lenovo Prize of $1 lakh, which is equal to a mini Nobel Prize for a developing world scientist. In fact, he has got 43 honorary doctorates from 43 universities, which is, I think, a all-time record in the world. His fight against the wrong grant of US patents on wound healing properties as also basmati rice are historic. They gave traditional knowledge the rightful place in the knowledge systems around the world. His creation of traditional knowledge digital library has eliminated forever the biopiracy by MNCs. Dr. Mashelkar has created the culture of patenting in India, among the academics as also in industry. He has created magic of reverse transfer of technology by licensing our own patents to leading multinationals in areas that they were leaders in, thus proving the great prowess of the Indian mind. Dr. Mashelkar and Dr. Kakodkar, thank you so much for being with us, taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedules to be with us today. So let me start the questions. To begin with, I'd like to take you back to your childhood and reflect on your beginnings. Could you share with us about your journey, those who influenced you the most when you were young, your school, your college, and the values you have imbibed along the way? Let me start with Dr. Kakodkar first.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. I was born in Madhya Pradesh, a very small place called Barwani. And then I spent my childhood, the school education, at a nearby place, equally small, called Khargon. Now that place was essentially a Hindi belt, but part of the Holkars, the region which was controlled by Holkars. And so in spite of being a Hindi belt, it had a Marathi school. There are only some 200 Marathi speaking families, but there was a Marathi medium primary school. And I studied in that school. So even in a Hindi area, I did my primary education in Marathi, which I think for me, I think it was very valuable. Later on, I finished schooling in Khargon, came to Mumbai for college education, did my engineering at VJTI, and that was followed by entry into atomic energy. We have a one-year orientation program, and then you get into, so that converted me from a mechanical engineer coming out of VJTI into a nuclear engineer who spent the whole life in atomic energy. So that's broadly what I am, and I think we can talk more about it later, but enough for the present.
You have to unmute yourself, Raj.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, let me start. I know Raj is asking me to sort of respond. Well, there is one more similarity between Anil and myself. Anil, all his life has worked in Atomic Energy Commission. That's the only thing he has done. And all my life, I also have worked for CSIR, Council of Scientific Industrial Research. When you ask me about my beginning, I think to all Goans, this is very well known. I was born in Marshall. That is how I am Marshalkar. My father died when I was 6, and my widowed mother brought me to Mumbai. She actually did practically manual work to bring me up. She was not a literate lady. 2 meals a day was a challenge. I remember studying under street lights. Uh, there were big challenges, and it was Tata scholarship that actually helped me to study. Just 60 rupees per month, but it made my life. In terms of your question about who has influenced you, there is a textbook in Marathi in Maharashtra state, and there is a lesson on my life which is my 4 gurus. So those 4 gurus were my mother, and there were 3 other teachers. So let me tell you briefly about how they influenced me. Most important was my mother, by the way. Although she was illiterate, she understood the importance of setting very high standards. See, in mathematics, Raj, I always used to get 100, but occasionally I will get 97. You know what she will do? She will sit with me. I was happy with the 97. She would say, where did you lose the 3 marks? That is how she benchmarked. I remember there was an incident where, because every day she was looking for a new job, some stitching, something or the other. Our survival depended on that. And she had gone to Mumbai. Those of you who know Mumbai, Prarthana Samaj, there's this Congress house. And she stood in the queue for a job. And when her turn came, she was refused a job because they asked her what is her qualification. And and the minimum qualification was 3rd standard. And she honestly said, I don't have 3rd standard. And she could have lied, because there was no certificate. But that is one value she gave me as a guru. That was the second. The first, perfection. The second was that. And while coming back, she said, why have I been insulted? Because I don't have education. So I'll make sure that my son had the highest possible education. She did not know what it was. So when I finished my BKM and I was going to take up a job, she said, no, I found out there is a PhD. When I did my PhD, I wanted to take up a job. She said, no, I have heard about something higher than that, some postdoctor or something, And I remember when she left us, just 30, 40 days before that, I had got my 25th honorary doctorate. You mentioned about my 43. At that time, I got 25. She said, now I'm satisfied. And she left us on 17 November 2006. So that was my mother as a guru. The second influence on my life was my guru, Principal Bhave, because, to collect those 21 rupees that were necessary. I studied also in Marathi school, by the way. I'm very proud to say. I think audience should know that. Anil Kakodkar as well as Raghunath Mashelkar have studied in Marathi school. I studied in municipal school, by the way. And it made no difference, basically. So anyway, she had difficulty in collecting 21 rupees. And finally, we borrowed it from somebody who was a housemaid in Chowpatty. That was her saving, which she gave us. And so I didn't get admission in great schools. Wilson High School or Aryan High School, etc. They were famous. I got in Union High School, where the poorest of the poor children used to go. But that poor school had rich teachers. One of them was Principal Bhave, who made my life. So he always believed in not chalk and talk. He wanted to see us things. And one of the experiments that he did was he took us out into the sun, and he had a convex lens in his hand. He had a piece of paper and he moved it up and down. And he said, this is the focal length. What the brightest spot was there. And then he held it for some time and the paper burned. And then he turned to me for some reason and said, Mashelkar, like this, if you focus, you can achieve anything in life. You can burn a paper and so on. So that gave me 2 lessons. One, science is so fantastic, I must become a scientist. That was a moment of inspiration for me. That was a wow moment for me. And the second is you focus and you can achieve anything, And similarly, Professor Sharma, with whom I did my PhD, I did not, after my BKM, it was fashionable to go abroad. I did not. I worked with him. And he gave me the values, ethical values. For example, my first paper with him was Sharma and Mashelkar. The second was Mashelkar and Sharma. And third was just Mashelkar. He did not put his name. All right. In fact, he's the only one who has this list of publications where the independent papers published by his students are published. Also, he taught me frugal innovation. My annual grant used to be 10,000 rupees, something like $130 at that time. And he said, power of ideas matter. It is not the power of budget. And that stood me well. So I will just stop at this. You asked me about what was my background and who influenced me most. And I would say, out of these four gurus, I have talked about three gurus. Maybe I'll refer to the fourth guru a little later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. I just wanted to ask you, Dr. Kakodkar, did you have a predisposition to the sciences? What made you join VJTI? What made you predisposed to the sciences?
Well, I think in the school, particularly, I was particularly good at mathematics. And while in school, I was, as Dr. Mashelkar said, getting 100 out of 100. And I have also been beaten by my mother if I got 99 out of 100. So, but then when I came to Bombay, frankly, it was, that the better students used to go to science. And by the way, there was an interesting episode. I did my matriculation from Madhya Pradesh board. And the results in Mumbai, the SSC results, they get declared much earlier than Madhya Pradesh board. So here, the results for SSC were declared and the college admissions started. And here was Anil Kakodkar, who had no result of himself. So, and in Bombay in those days, and maybe even now, 2-3 days and the admissions get full. And so I was worried what to do. So I sort of contacted Vice Principal Bhide of Ruparel College, whom I knew through some relations. Now, I told him my difficulty. And he was such a magnanimous person. He just asked me, will you get first class? I said, surely I'll get first class. There is no issue at all. So he said, you come tomorrow. This was in his house. He said, come tomorrow to the college, meet me in the office, and I'll give you provisional admission with a condition that if you don't get first class, I'll throw you out. I said, deal. So that is how I got into Ruparel College. And then, of course, the brighter students were following the science stream. So Anil Kakodkar also decided to go to science stream. That's how it was. But then during those 2 years, first year in intermediate science, I actually developed a great passion for science. Somehow we had a professor Deshpande. He used to do research. This was actually an arts and science college, not great college for research, but he used to do research. And the entire college, all young students in the college used to be in awe of Professor Deshpande. And because he was conducting research, he was around sounds and basically the stringed instruments. Well, that's all I know about his research because there's a lot of distance. But that really created some impression on me that I should do science. When I passed the engineering college, I had become by that time a hardcore engineer. And when I started looking at, I also, in fact, our condition was very precarious. So I had to get into a job, come what may. Now, the job market was very good in those days. So, I used to get letters from companies. And but none of them attracted me. They were either jobs in industrial engineering in those days or jobs in marketing. Occasionally, some jobs in a kind of machine tool design and that kind of a thing. And I found they're all very repetitive. And then somebody said, if you do not want a repetitive job, you get into research and development. And that's how I came to know what research and development is. And then they said, well, in BARC, if you get in, you are sure to get into research and development. And that's how I got into R&D. And then I found great application of science. And so actually, I started finding my wavelength as I went up and up. So by the time I finished this orientation program, of course, I stood first in that program and broke all records which were made by other people till that time. And that record, by the way, remained kind of as such for almost 7 years. So I actually found my wavelength. And then we had, of course, great mentors in BARC and in atomic energy, even in our training school. That really drove me to the atomic energy and related development. So that is how I got into science and mathematics.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next thing. You're both products of the Indian education system, of course, Marathi education and no IITs, nothing of that sort. And you have excelled, both geniuses. Now you have chaired national committees on higher education. I would like to ask you, Dr. Mashigal, to begin with, what are your views on the future of education in India, from the right to education to the new education policy this year?
Well, you said future of education. I'll tell you something else. There is a discussion on what is the most powerful equation that scientists have developed. So somebody got up and said Newton's law, second law, force equal to mass into acceleration. All of us know that. Somebody else said, no, it is Einstein, E equal to mc square, right? E is energy, m is mass, and c is velocity of light. So I was sitting quiet there. And then somebody said, you are not saying anything at all. I said, no Newton, no Einstein. The most powerful equation is E equal to F. Education is equal to future. So when you ask me about future of education, I would say education is future, basically, all right? And therefore, I'm very happy that the government has come out with a new education policy. There are a number of challenges that we have as we speak, for example, today. You're right when you said right to education to right way of education. Right education, if you just see in the education parlance, we talk about Jnana Samvardhan, Buddhi Samvardhan, Vritti Samvardhan, etc. But one of the most important part is Mulya Samvardhan, the values, so as to say. So how do you do that? I think is going to be one of the biggest challenges. The other thing about right education is somebody said on the other day that 2/3 of our children who are in senior schools will end up in jobs which do not exist today. Will end up in jobs which do not exist today. So what kind of education do you give to the children for jobs that do not exist today? So there are certain core competencies, if I may put it this way, which are going to be permanent, no matter what field you take, whether it was Anil's mechanical engineering, my chemical engineering, or somebody else's science, etc. They are dealing with complexity, creativity, emotional intelligence. At the end of the day, it is not just sympathy, but empathy, compassion that is going to sort of matter. Cognitive flexibility, then ability to do cooperative work, for example, not just man and machine, not robots, cobots. It is not man versus machine, it is man and machine. All these are going to be important. So education has to impart these sort of The third problem that I see today is the following, that COVID threw away 1.6 billion children out of school, and they had to study from home. That is online learning. But for online learning, you required a digital device, a tablet or smartphone or a PC. You require bandwidth, you require connectivity. And 1/3 of these 1.6 billion children don't have that. All right. So previously, access to education was, I got 60 rupees per month scholarship, and that was good enough for me. But that is not good enough today. You have to have that particular access. And I'm finding children are committing suicides, as a matter of fact. You know, just 3-4 weeks ago, a girl from Satara committed suicide as a result of that. So this is going to be our biggest challenge. How do we remove this digital deprivation to get access to education? Because this is going to stay. And the final part is about the evolution of these new technologies, you know, whether it is big data analytics, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. So children have to become smart in that. In China, for example, can you believe me that they undergo, the primary school children undergo training in AI and coding and so on and so forth, etc. You know, so that is the kind of preparation that we need to have. And the last point I will tell you is a very simple one, common sense. This learning by rote has to go, basically. Marathit आपण म्हणतो घोका आणि ओका, that has to go, basically. It is learning by doing, and doing not what the teacher says, but you have to create. So learning by creating and learning by co-creating, as I say. So this is a big shift that we have to make in terms of our education, so that education becomes, determines the kind of future that we want for our children. Thank you.
Dr. Kakodkar, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, certainly. Education is one area, they say, where maximum number of reports have been written. And so if you talk about education, somebody would have said about it already. Now, but the important thing, as Dr. Mashelkar also sort of said, the important thing is, see, education, even the old age, you know, in the British era, even Macaulay's education, which was meant with a particular design, but it did help. It did actually contribute to freedom movement. Education, in whatever form, it actually helps, incremental help. What we need to do today is to create an education where children are ready to face the reality when they will enter the job market, when they will enter the workspace. And now things are changing very fast. So earlier, things have been always changing, but earlier that rate of change was very slow. So maybe in one professional lifetime, 20, 30 years, things would change, but only incrementally. Today, as Dr. Mashelkar said, within 5 years, technology changes its outlook. And so, first of all, you need to be a lifelong learner. It's not as if you learned in schools and colleges and then the education stops. Now, so inculcate that ability to keep learning, keep expanding our abilities and skills. Now, while we do that, that education must also be in some manner situated learning, so that you know what the problems are, what are the important problems which need to be solved. And then if you develop capability to solve those problems through education, then you are able to contribute at a much higher level. And if everybody is able to contribute at that higher level, I think the country progresses much faster. For example, in the research sense, it's also I think I must say that here. See, research can be of two kinds. One, the research that can be done. I have to get a degree. I have to publish so many papers. This is a topic on which I do. There are enough instruments in my lab. And so if I do, I'll be able to achieve whatever I want in 3 years or 4 years. The other is research that needs to be done to solve a problem. And that then, once you identify an important problem, you must solve it, come what may, regardless of the resources, regardless of, and that requires a kind of passion. In fact, many times the question is asked, for example, C.V. Raman earned a Nobel Prize, and then after that, nobody earned a Nobel Prize in India, working in India. And there are a lot of things have been written on this, why. But the important thing is about the passion, the level of passion. And I think education has to create that passion to address the real problems of the society. And when that happens, I think one can say that, you have quite a good quality education. The last thing about education that I would say is, India has a lot of disparities. We have progressed economically, but country has seen a lot of disparities. And I think that is, it's because of several divides. Digital divide was talked about. But I think there is an education divide also. For example, the facilities available in cities and facilities available in villages. There is a world of difference. And when the larger part of our society or population or young people live in villages, I think that's where you need high quality education. Now, how can that be done is an important issue. And because, question is, how do we get so many teachers to work in those areas? How do we get the right infrastructure? All this costs money, varies so much of money. And so education leads to creation of technology, which creates livelihood, extra livelihood, so economic progress. But technology can also contribute to enhancement of the education, its quality, its reaching out to larger number of people. And we need, if you leave it to technology, then that's not going to be, in fact, that is going to be to some extent counterproductive. So you need a combination of the kind of actual mentoring by teachers along with a multiplier effect of technology. So even in education, if we do that, then you can reach large masses with good quality education, particularly backed up by AI. In fact, I know in China, a single teacher in a classroom is guided by, this is actually an experiment going on at the level of some 10,000 students or more, where while teacher is teaching, there is an AI tool which the camera looks at all the students in the class and makes assessment and guides the teacher that, so-and-so student sitting in that corner, he is not attentive. Other fellow is trying hard to understand, but he is not able to understand. And where is, and so teacher can engage with, even while teaching a large class, you can make that individual attention, which is very important in teaching. So I think there are many dimensions to good teaching. What I mentioned is only a tip of iceberg, I'm sure. But that is the key. If India wants to go forward, I entirely agree. Education is future.
That was fantastic. I hope we are able to get the government to listen to your advice. Now, just to change track, both of you have been known to fight battles. Dr. Mashelkar in the case of production of our traditional knowledge by revoking US patents and creating traditional knowledge digital library. Dr. Kakodkar, you had your own battles with the US, and finally, India has played a key role in signing the 2008 nuclear deal. I'm sure our audience would love to know behind the scene excitement in your battles and what these battles actually meant for India. So, Dr. Kakodkar, would you like to go first? I mean, the nuclear thing would be really exciting for many of us. If you can share some of those things behind the scenes, excitements and battles.
Well, surely. When I entered atomic energy, one of the first indoctrination, and I'll use that word deliberately, indoctrination, that I sort of saw for myself was this word self-reliance. And it came from none other than Dr. Homi Bhabha himself. He died very soon after I joined atomic energy, just little more than a year. But in those years in training school and some early period, he used to kind of say this word, self-reliance. And of course, he was a great liberal. He had himself a lot of linkages in UK and US with great scientists. He could get, for example, for Apsara reactor, the first Indian research reactor that was set up, he got the whole fuel from UK, and that was more due to the personal equation between Dr. Bhabha and Sir John Cockcroft. Now, such a man was giving such a high importance on self-reliance. And so I remember in our young days, if you want to do some development or some experiment, and if you needed some instrument and you placed an indent, it will not be approved. Make it yourself. That was what we were told. And there used to be a lot of anger amongst us young people in those days, saying that look at such places, people are doing so much of work, their work is faster, our work is slow, and we'll be left behind and things like that. But that mantra was never compromised. And that actually, I would say, just like, when you soldiers go to battle, you battle harden them. Actually, that we were actually hardened in this principle of self-reliance. And that came in actually the first shock that India received in terms of technology denial was when we conducted the peaceful nuclear experiments in 1974. And Canadians were constructing, of course, it was a collaboration project because they had not constructed a commercial reactor till then. And so it was an Indo-Canadian cooperation agreement. And it was actually that Canada will build a reactor in Douglas Point, and India will build a reactor here at Rawatbhata, and this will be happening in joint cooperation. And that was the framework within which it was done. However, of course, they were much more knowledgeable than us, goes without saying. And then after the 74 experiment, they just walked out. So it was left to Indians to sort of complete those reactors, manufacture them, commission them, operate them, and there was lots and lots of problems. But it is that principle of self-reliance, that mantra, that actually enabled us to get over all these challenges. In fact, initially, our reactors, there used to be a lot of time delay. Sometimes I remember reactor construction has taken even 10 years, 12 years, and things like that. But we mastered that. And in fact, I remember by the time it came to Tarapur 1 and 2 is where India's program began with the General Electric light water reactors, boiling water reactors. We also went back to same site for constructing the first of kind two 500 megawatt indigenous pressurized heavy water reactors, all made in India, design, development, manufacture, everything, including material manufacture done in India. And that reactor, you'll be happy to know, in fact, I had to make a cabinet note to go to cabinet to seek approval for completion of that reactor in less time than what was scheduled and less money than what was scheduled, because ultimately calculation of tariff requires these two numbers to be plugged in. And so, and probably I will be the only one who would have gone to cabinet to seek an approval of the government for less than budgeted money and less than budgeted time to declare the project completion at that rate. That was the power of self-reliance. And then, of course, but of course, at post 74, the embargoes had gone up and they started easing because everybody wants to do business. And I was a very keen observer of this dynamics and this psychology. Then came 98, we conducted the weapons test. And then, of course, the whole thing became even more kind of serious and aggressive. The denial regime had become even tighter. Now, that was the time I had already become director bar. And that was the time I started thinking about how to handle this situation. And while we had to exercise our strategic autonomy, because that's necessary for India's defense, but it was clear that we cannot be running a nuclear power program without adequate uranium supplies, without kind of living in isolation like that. So that is where I learned the second part of self-reliance, and that was actually taught to me by Dr. Ramanna. That self-reliance doesn't mean you create an iron curtain around yourself. You do what you want to do by yourself, but you make sure that you do it in a manner that you don't become vulnerable. See, if your people are giving you something and you get it, and tomorrow as a part of that, you make yourself vulnerable, dependent on them, then that is not quite serious. But at the same time, you want to make rapid progress. You want to make sure that your supply chain, the input-output linkages are robust. You cannot be doing everything on earth by yourself. So you must cooperate and figure out that which are those things where you can get and you will not become vulnerable, and what are those things where you can become vulnerable, and factor that in Indian working, then your self-reliance would become very robust. And so I actually knew this issue. And, in the something around 2001, 2008 of 1998 nuclear tests had kind of done its maximum kind of embargo related damage. It also dawned on people, not just here, but also elsewhere, particularly in the United States, that India is a big country, big market for electricity. And if India does not go strong on nuclear energy, it will, at that time, the main thing was coal power. So it will make much more coal power, which will have a climate related problems. And it is in that context that this dialogue for nuclear cooperation started taking place. And then, of course, the mindset of keeping India under control, putting kind of restrictions on technology. You can't be doing reprocessing, you can't be doing enrichment. So all these things were there. And then there was this huge lollipop that you will be eligible for civil nuclear commerce. And then, of course, there was an internal battle because there are many here in India who thought that, oh, US is coming to us, we are starting cooperation now. So, this is an opportunity we cannot let go of. Now, I had to say at that time that while I want cooperation, I also understand the power of cooperation, but not at any cost. And certainly our strategic autonomy cannot be compromised. So there are certain things which will not be kept within the purview of any external country or external organization. And that led to a huge conflict, both internally and externally. Finally, of course, I knew that the need for cooperation on their part is bigger than need for cooperation on our part. So I just literally remained adamant that, well, if this cooperation has to take place, it has to take place on our terms. Luckily, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he backed me up in those days very strongly. But uh, but I had to fight a battle both with Indians as well as Americans. And Americans went to the extent of saying that, well, everything is all right. All the people in India are happy with cooperation, but there is this fellow in the room, 900, 600-pound gorilla in the room, who talks sense, who talks logic. So you cannot win an argument with him, but unless he comes around, we will not be able to go through. And they actually published this in a newspaper in United States. So when somebody asked me, I said, okay, I take that as a compliment. So that is how that nuclear battle was there. Very exciting, but finally, I think everything went up well, went down to the wire. Thank you.
What a great story. Thank you for sharing this, Dr. Kakodkar. Dr. Mashelkar, let's hear one of your battles now. You
Oh, yeah.
revoked US patents, and let's hear you now, please.
Yeah, but before I go into my battles, let me tell you something about Anil's triumphant victories. I remember after 1998, 11 May 1998, when these tests were done, we had the SS Bhatnagar Prize ceremony in Delhi. And I remember Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. And after the function, we were walking for tea, and he walked slowly, as you know. So on the way, we began a talk, and he said, Mashelkar ji, ये तो अमेरिका ने तो सैंक्शन लगा दिए हैं अभी. So साइंटिस्ट का क्या है उसमें उनका क्या होगा वगैरह, something of that kind he asked me. And I still remember, I said, sir, let them put all the sanctions that they want. As long as we don't put sanctions on our mind, they can do nothing. That is why whenever Atmanirbhar Bharat is mentioned, I say it has to be Atma Vishwas and Atma Samman. What Anil represents is Atma Vishwas and Atma Samman. The self-dignity. It's not just self-reliance. My battles are far more simple than, by the way, Anil's battles. They're very simple. I think the first one was a matter of principle. I was reading a newspaper in Delhi, and I saw suddenly that wound healing properties of turmeric were patented. I said, come on, my mother knows about it. My mother knows how can they be patented? Patenting is taking those intellectual property rights, by claiming of it. So one of the things, Raj, about me, which is a strength as well as a weakness, is that I don't think from here all the time. I think from here. So in the evening, I made a public announcement. I was giving Hussain Zahir Memorial Lecture. P.N. Aksar was chairing it. I said, I will fight it. I forgot that as DG of CSIR, I had all the freedom in the world. But as Secretary to Government of India, I had no freedom. I had to take minister's permission, government's permission, etc. And I made that announcement because I thought it was wrong. And of course, I will not take you the whole story. We fought it and we won it. It was a small battle, but it was very important because it was symbolic, because the traditional knowledge of India, it was not considered as knowledge at all. Then I got an opportunity in World Intellectual Property Organization. I was chairman there for 2.5 years of what they call as a Standing Committee on Information Technology, and I challenged them on a matter of principle. So that was what it was. I said, look, the knowledge generated in Harvard, Caltech, Princeton, MIT is knowledge, and knowledge generated by my predecessors in laboratories of life is not knowledge. How come? And we forced a change in the international pattern classification because they didn't used to consider traditional knowledge as knowledge at all, basically. And then we created this traditional knowledge digital library where all that knowledge was sort of captured, and it came because I had gone to US Patent Office. I asked them, how did they give that wrong patent? And I said, it was not just one, there were 200 others. I showed to them the Sanskrit text, the English translation, and what they had given. And then they showed to me how those wrong patterns are given, because they said all this knowledge is either here or is buried in the books. Okay. And that traditional knowledge digital library has been made compulsory now It's almost 3 crore pages, by the way, for all the patent offices so that no single wrong patent will be given. Basmati was tougher because Basmati had economic repercussions. It was a far tougher battle to find because they had, like we take Basmati, great smell. We never thought about what it was. They found that it was 2-acetyl, 1-vinyl pyrrolidone, and it has to be in the limit of 100 to 500 parts per billion. And I had to prove through my CFTRI, Central Food Technology Research Institute, that it was there. Because in turmeric, it was a matter of just principle. But in Basmati, our exports of thousands of crores would have been hurt because if that patent was valid, then you can't produce or distribute or sell it up there. So these are two battles far simpler than Anil's, but do have long-term repercussions in terms of not only giving dignity to traditional knowledge, but ensuring that our rights were upheld. Can't hear you. Unmute.
Let's turn now to the present COVID pandemic. And, we have turned to science in one way or another in this year, more than any other year, whether it is learning what a virus is or what mRNA means, wondering how long a vaccine will take to develop, to reading about R0 and rates. Could you talk to us, Dr. Mashelkar, first, how science and technology has risen to the occasion and delivered the results in our battle against the COVID pandemic?
Yes, as an Indian scientist who has spent all his life in India, I'm extremely proud about the way Indian science has risen to the occasion and dealt with it. If you just compare what it was and what it is today, we had no point of care diagnostics, by the way, when the pandemic came. We were dependent upon the Chinese, and they were imported and they were found to be faulty, and we were left with nothing with us. And I remember right here in Pune, that MyLab, after the genome sequence was known, within 6 weeks, they had created the RT-PCR active. Okay. And then after that, what has happened in terms of the number of tests that we're doing, et cetera, they all just spiraled up. And we demonstrated that we can do it. In fact, the Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, they have done something fantastic. It is almost like a pregnancy test, paper strip based. And they have used that CRISPR-Cas9, which is the most advanced technology which got Nobel Prize this year. On the basis of that, and within 1 hour, you get to know. And the costs are not 5,000 rupees. They're just 500 rupees. And Tata Sons are going to produce it. So these are diagnostics. If you look at PPEs, personal protection equipment, we're importing them from China. It is incredible that within less than 60 days, we became an exporting country. I'm extremely proud to see this. You look at ventilators, for example, again, they were being imported. And I'm very happy to see how industry rose to the occasion. There is this Marico company, which has this Marico Innovation Foundation, and from 2003, I have been the chairman of the Marico Innovation Foundation's Advisory Council. And they created a 2.5 crore grand challenge, creating ventilators, for example, or PPEs. And they had to be made for Indian conditions. You get the point, not just the imported one. What are the Indian conditions? You don't have medical oxygen pipelines. You have power breakdowns. You don't have trained staff. And I'm very proud to say the winners of those awards practically have created these precisely for our and what I'm very happy to see, the organizations like CSR, ICMR, DBT, etc., they rose. But what I'm happy to see are young startups, in their mid-20s, late 20s, they rose. For example, in my mother's name, I have this Anjani Mashelkar Inclusive Innovation Award. It's a small award, 1 lakh. This year, I created an extra award for those who created innovations in COVID. And one of them has gone to what is called as DOSI. What is DOSI? You must have heard that a lot of people died because the ICU units were not available, ICU facilities were not available, and there was a sudden surge, basically. What he has found is a solution for that. So he uses Internet of Things. Basically, you have a bed and you slip those sensor-based systems under that. And it is able to measure 7 of your vital parameters, by the way. It is absolutely incredible. The accuracy, medical accuracy, 98.4%. Cost, just 5% of what the ICU setup will be. So you can convert a bed into a stand-up the sort of ICU, you can quite clearly see. And what are its implications? Because you are doing remote monitoring. So therefore, as you know, all the healthcare workers, they have been the most vulnerable ones in terms of etc. So I can give you examples after examples, where Indian science has risen and done things which are in an amazing period of span, by the way. They have not taken 10 years, they have done it in 10 weeks, 10 days. So I feel that, in fact, by the way, I will tell you something interesting. There was this Indo-US Joint Council meeting in Atlanta. And the first session was on research, innovation, technology. And they asked me to give the keynote. And they said, pick your topic. And you know what was the topic on which I spoke to the Americans? It was this, how India rose to the occasion and how some of these things, we can even offer to sort of America. So answer to your question is, our Indian science technology community has done us proud. And I'm very happy that the entire nation and the political leadership is realizing the importance of science, because it is science which solves, technology that transforms, innovation that impacts, and therefore science must be fully supported, strongly supported.
Dr. Kakodkar, would you like to add to that?
Well, yes, I think for me, what was most impressive in this pandemic in terms of creating technology contribution is the contribution of our startups. It's an amazing story. I remember, it's a recent phenomena. The way the startups are mushrooming and they are picking up challenges and addressing them, and that we really saw acceleration during COVID period. I think also very noteworthy, it's not quite science and technology, but also the way it was managed. For example, some of the densest populations, for example, Dharavi, the way the pandemic was controlled in Dharavi, I think is amazing. Many Western countries have not been able to manage. And in that context, if you look at juxtapose what has happened in Dharavi, I think it's a wonder. Now it's more in the area domain of management, but still, I think it's innovation, all right. And so that is also very, very important for me. But I would like to slightly shift the discussion to another angle, and that is, just like COVID has made us realize our own strengths, particularly in science and making technology, the relevant technology to address challenges and all. This has given us renewed confidence, clearly. But at the same time, it has also brought up several vulnerabilities. And actually, seeing large number of people, particularly the daily wage workers, wanting to walk back, literally walk in some cases, if 1,000 kilometers, for example, in the hot sun, without any kind of knowing as to where the food tomorrow will come from and what not. So that kind of distress getting caused suddenly, actually tells that in terms of organization of our society, there are some fault lines, and I think we need to address those fault lines, and that is another learning, I think, that we should think about as an experience from COVID. And I, for one, I strongly believe, I have been championing this for some years now. I talk about a concept called SILAGE. SILAGE is a joint word, CI from city and LLAGE from village. So it's what Dr. Kalam used to talk, Pura, providing urban amenities in rural areas. Now that was important, but I think bringing in knowledge element there is even more important, even more critical. And this combination of silage is where you bridge the divide between city and village. You create a knowledge bridge between city and village. And, for example, we are now talking about we were in IT era and now we're migrating into full-fledged knowledge era. So today, if you look at our economy, the largest part of our economy consists of service sector. Now, service sector is impacted most by way of the knowledge technologies. Of course, everything is impacted, but service sector is something where it makes a quick impact. You can get very quick results. Just as when IT came on the scene, you saw a big economic impact and a lot of people got jobs and things like that. Now that can happen in service sector, partly by IT itself, partly by other applications of knowledge in villages. If and this is actually to my mind a fairly simple thing to do, to sort of make the village youth both IT literate and IT capable, or for that matter, ability to leverage these new technologies, even up to some of them based on artificial intelligence, for example. Now, if that happens, you can have the service sector making a significant contribution to rural economy, in addition to agriculture and value addition to agriculture. And now, see, rural population is more than half. So the number is more than half. And here is service sector, which contributes to more than 50% of India's economy. Now, if the more than half the youth of India can contribute to the service sector economy by their being empowered, you can see the impact it can create. And when that happens, then there is no need for them to come back to cities in search of a job, have to live in slums, or, they can, just like we talk about work from home, now they can work from village. And a good number of jobs can be done by them sitting in village. In fact, we have an example of this Joyo moving to village in Tamil Nadu and doing global operations from a village. So all I'm trying to say is we should look at rural empowerment of that kind, which I believe is quickly possible. But of course, we have to take into account other segments of knowledge-driven technologies, call it in manufacturing. 3D printing is one area where, again, the rural sector can do, or even the value addition to agro produce, where again knowledge can contribute a lot. So I think, see, if you ask me today if I have the right and money and the choice, that you have to set up a university, where would you set it up? A normal siting committee will look at infrastructure, look at connectivity, look at jobs for spouses, and converge on a urban location. If you ask me, I will converge on a rural location where there is a reasonable penetration of education at school or college level, and there are opportunities for rural people to, there are in terms of the resources, raw materials, and all opportunities for creating wealth. I would put the university right there, even if it costs maybe 30-40% more. I think it will produce returns much more than that. So that is one thing I think which we need to pay attention to as a part of learning out of this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Fascinating. I'm going to change tracks a bit now because we have limited time. So I'm going to move to geopolitics. Our challenges with China are not limited, only to the border issues. India could have been or could be the pharmacy of the world, However, we face threats from other countries, which manufacture many of the raw materials faster, and our factories are shutting shop. For example, China supplies most of our APIs, and we can't just say that we will go with China less. We have to become less and less dependent on China. How do we do that? I mean, we touched upon vulnerability, but how do we strategize? And based on your global experience, what do we feel will be the new global alignments now?
Yeah.
Dr. Mashilkar, shall I ask you to go first?
Sure. I think you've hit the right spot, because when we want to be Atmanirbhar, this is something that we have to focus on. Yes, your point is absolutely right. Our Chinese dependence is very high in terms of pharma, the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, 70%, we depend upon them. Furniture, 57%, can you believe it? Electronics, 45%, manufacturing capital goods, 32%. And our dependence has increased, by the way. We export, right? And for export, there is what is called as FEA, that is foreign value added. 10 years ago, it was around 10% from China. Now it is 34.6%. Compared to, let's say, if you take US, if you take Korea, if you take UK, etc., they will be all 6%. China is 34.6%. So this is a great vulnerability, and therefore we can't suddenly say China-less, by the way, because supposing we say no, the API will come to zero. I mean, our pharmacy of the world will collapse. And therefore, I'm very happy that the government has come out with schemes now, as a matter of fact, policies, schemes, financial support, so that we reduce our dependence. I think that is going to be the most critical point as far as China is concerned. And I'm very happy that, for example, I heard the statement by Mukesh Ambani on the other day with regard to developing 5G entirely on our own, whereas the rest of the world, as you know, everybody was dependent upon UI, etc. So I think there is nothing that we cannot do, as a matter of fact, if it is backed up, technology plus policy, if they go hand in hand. And I'm very happy to see the government is taking a lot of proactive measures. We can actually do that. I have absolute confidence.
Dr. Kakodkar?
Sorry, there's one more point I wanted to make, Raj, very quickly.
Sorry.
Yeah. Very quickly, I wanted to make one point. However, there is a caveat. See, we say Atmanirbhar Bharat, make in India. But make in India, if it is just assembled in India, Raj, will collapse. I'll give the example of mobiles, for example. 2015, Indian mobile manufacturers, for example, like Macromax, etc. Our share, can you believe it, was 45%. Today, what is it? Indian manufacturers, from 45%, it has come down to 7%. So we have eaten our lunch, Chinese. In 2015, when we were 45%, they were just 9%. Today, you know what they are? 68%. So we have gone down from 45 to 7. They have gone up from 9 to 68. Why? Because we went for assembled in India, SDQs, and they were innovating. They were sort of all the time, if you see their mobiles, to make it personal, user-friendly, this feature, that feature, etc., etc. So what I want to emphasize is that Atmanirbhar Bharat is fine, but make in India has to be make in India, but invent in India. Without that, we'll become vulnerable. I think that's the second very, very important lesson I want to talk about. And that is where science, technology, inventions, risk-taking, all that comes in.
Dr. Kakodkar,
yeah,
thoughts on our vulnerabilities and how can we?
Yeah. See, kind of matching China's prowess is actually is a major challenge, and I believe we have to start from policy issues, because you look at industry, you look at Indian worker, Chinese worker, You look at Indian scientists, Chinese scientists, and all those people who contribute to this capability. I think it's an uneven field for comparison to be competitive. So I think our approach has to necessarily begin by at the policy level. And I want to share an anecdote at this time as to how this is important. It's not connected with the pharma segment, but uh, uh, but at least it's connected with food. So let me say that. Uh, See, this was about the issue of guar gum. The guar gum and its derivatives uh, have a lot of applications apart from as a daily vegetable and food item for all of us. It has applications in cosmetics, in food segment, industrial segment. There are several applications, and these were known. It's not that something is known now. However, consequent to the shale revolution, shale gas or shale oil revolution, when it came to this fracking technology, you fracture the rocks. Now that requires a kind of lubricant, and that is derived out of this guar gum, and that suddenly created, the shale fracking boom took place in United States, but that created a huge demand for guar, and India was a prime supplier. I think at one stage we had 80% market share, I was told. And it was like that for just a couple of years, and it just suddenly plummeted down. And I was chairing TIFAC at that time. So there was a reference from Ministry of Commerce. कि भाई ये क्या हो गया? Because farmers are complaining, because the farmers saw the boom, they were exporting, and now because it sort of dwindled down, complaining what happened. So I had some group from US visiting me at that time. So I asked them what is happening. So they inquired and came back and said, no, this was, there's a direct deal. Farmers were selling. There were this in between agents. So they were not dealing with all that in a very fair manner. So there was an issue of quality, the quality, timely supplies, and all kinds of ethical practices in commerce. And so they actually are so angry that many of them decided not to get anything from India. Okay, that was one story. And then I tried to patch up, and I leave that separately. So I started inquiring that, well, if you are selling guar gum, they cannot be using that as it is. There must be value adding. So what's happening? So patent search is a great tool to figuring out as to who is doing the maximum benefit or is getting maximum benefit out of a particular raw material, or how the technology is deployed for the value addition. And we found that India holds less than 1% patent on this. Then we found that China holds significant kind of patent portfolio. And then on further inquiry, we actually found that, well, after American sort of stopped taking it from India, it started going to China. And China was doing well. We were doing some minimal value addition. China was doing something like 40, 50% value addition. And from there, it was going to the United States. And the remaining value addition was happening in US. So who was the maximum beneficiary of this? Indian raw material going to US for final destination or final application, maximum beneficiary was China. Now, I think this is, and we come to know about these things after, after the horses have bolted, as it were. Now, this is where that policy making comes in. Policy making is, there are many shades to this policy. And I think we need to, that's why we created the technology vision document, Technology Vision 2035. So what are the technologies which are going to be of importance? look at whether there are gap areas. Are we paying attention to them? Create conditions for people to engage in research and development in that area, engage in manufacturing in that area. And when you, particularly when you ask industry to invest, you must make sure that they will, it will be a profitable business for them. Now, you can't expect industry to invest in a venture, howsoever strategically important, if it's a losing proposition. And so there are many such things which do not happen. So to me, it looks, while we talk about make in India is a kind of a good thing to say and motivate people, but at the same time, we should create a policy thrust in a manner where you create those activities, and once you create those activities, and then you do in a graded approach, so that you eliminate vulnerabilities where you think it's necessary, and of course and decide not to do many things which you are sure that you can always access international market. So because I know how Chinese deal with this problem, the way they dealt with rare earth issue and brought the world to knees is too well known. Everybody knows about this. And this is because the Chinese state played the game. They created the conditions where they made world depend on them, and afterwards suddenly pulled the carpet and said, now you have to only buy finished product from. And for 3-4 years, all these major global giants were reeling. Now, of course, they have recovered from there. So I think this is where that policy action becomes extremely, extremely important. And of course, all of us at the scientific level, industry level, other business level, we have to play supporting role. But it requires a coordinated effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Now from global, we are running out of time, so I'll just go another little fast. From global, I'd like to turn to local. Both of you have Goan origins. You are both involved actively in Goa's vision document, the 2035 document. Could you reflect on what you see as the new realities facing Goa now? What are our strengths and weaknesses? And what is the path forward for Goa and Goans? Dr. Mashelkar, to begin.
Oh, well, we have said it all in the Vision 2035 document. I think we had the benefit of having people like Anil Kakotkar and Vijay Kelkar and Vijay Bhatkar and Charles Correa, and I mean, you name them, they were all there as a matter of fact. And their entire distilled wisdom on how Goa should go forward is very much there as a matter of fact. And that document is as fresh today as it is. It was then, as a matter of fact. And I was very happy to hear about the same point that we had made in the document being reiterated with great force by the current Chief Minister. And whether the governments change or not, finally Goa first. And therefore, the vision has to remain the same. And if you remember, we had talked about Suramya Goa, Susanskrit Goa, Santulit Goa, Suvidya Goa, Samruddha Goa, Sushasit Goa, Swanandi Goa, etc., etc. But under each, we had given actionable plans. For example, if you look at industrial enterprise and how do we move, all right? We had said there that our industries, the strengths are natural resources and related logistic industries, tourism and related service value chain, healthcare and the pharma industry value chain, and knowledge, education, research, and entertainment value chain. In fact, we are given concrete ideas in terms of how to sort of move in that particular part, because finally knowledge is the key. I mean, if you look at the way the economies have moved, from agriculture economy to manufacturing economy to innovation economy to creative economy. And if you look at creative economies today, Singapore, for example, their income from creative economies is close to 47.3% as a matter of fact. Ours is a very, very low one. And the workers there are scientists, technologists, academic, etc., media, and so on and so forth. We had even proposed these high-tech mini Bollywood kind of things. We had pointed out that the market for example, animation, which is just dependent on the creativity, is close to $1 trillion. Even if we have 5% share of $1 trillion, you can see what difference it makes to the economy. So I think I know that this is work in progress, but I think if we go by that particular report, I'm not saying it because I chaired it and all of us were part of it or what is it. It's not that. We had the wisdom of the best minds in the country to sort of create that, with everybody having Goa at heart. In fact, there are 3 Govanta Vibhushans, by the way, in that committee. So I have to say, all right. So I would say it is not the power of idea, it is the power of execution that matters. Let's execute it. That's all that I'm saying.
Dr. Kakorkar?
Well, actually, I entirely agree and support what Dr. Mashelkar just now said. Just to reinforce that, I would say, I talked about silage a little while ago. Now, Goa, to my mind, this kind of close proximity or mixing between an urban culture and a rural culture. I think Goa is an ideal case. It already exists there. The things are so close to each other. And secondly, in terms of knowledge, uh, I have no actually hard statistics to say this, but if you ask a question of looking at high performance, you define some threshold for high performer and high performers per million population or something like that. If you ask, I think in Goa you will find that number much higher. Also, I believe the per capita income in Goa is already one of the best in the country. So I think in the knowledge economy, and particularly the way the situation in Goa is, they are all, very large number or most of them engaged in pursuit of knowledge, application of knowledge. They are all engaged in, very deeply connected with culture, performing arts. So Goa is a very rich place from a socio-cultural, and if you take education also is a part of culture uh, point of view. And also I remember it was late Manohar Parrikar. He told me once that you look at parameter and I'll prove to you that Goa is number one in most of those parameters. And then I later on looked through those numbers, and that was in fact true. Now, so I think Goa should be looking at something much bigger and much higher compared to what rest of the country is looking for, because Goa is in a position to achieve that. And based on this importance of the knowledge in the things going forward, economy and other things going forward, and also, Goa is not talking about sort of technologist as a kind of a human robot who has no kind of feelings. Goa is talking about people who are kind of, deeply rooted, who are talking about people who are culturally very, very rich. And so I think if you want to explore the future, Goa could be a great model to emulate. And so Goa could go forward into those directions where rest of the India, or for that matter, rest of the world may want to emulate. And I think it is quite possible. It's a, again, to quote Manohar Parrikar, he used to say Goa. In fact, I asked him about, what is his feeling. He was, I think, he was first term as chief minister, and I'm talking about that era. So he says, what do you feel being a politician? And that's why I asked him, how does an IIT graduate feel like being a politician? And he said, no, Goa is such a small state, I can run it like a chief executive officer. So there is that opportunity in taking Goa forward. And I think it will happen. And of course, with the support of everybody around, including the government, I see no reason why it should not happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're running out of time, but it's wonderful to hear so much from all of you. I wish we could have gone on longer, but we'll just have my closing question and then we'll open up to one or two audience questions because there are a lot of audience questions. We have many young people in Goa and all over who have registered in the audience today. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Kakodkar. What are the 5 mantras that you live by? Just 5.
I have only one mantra. And that one mantra is I depend on myself. And, in the book, I recently wrote an autobiographical book. So instead of writing a preface, I wrote Ekalavya's diary. So my attitude towards life is, being an Ekalavya. So, one must be dependent on oneself, but we learn from everything. There are teachers all around. Whether they accept you as a pupil or not, they are still teachers. And that is how all of us are made. That's what I strongly believe. And so for me, everybody around is a teacher, but at the end of the day, I had to depend on myself. So that is the only mantra I follow.
Dr. Mashelkar.
Yes. I don't have a single mantra. I have 5 mantras. I'll talk to you. I think the first is where you begin your life, you have no control on that, to whom you are born, under what conditions. But where you end up, your destiny is in your hands. All right. And therefore, we have to keep our aspirations high. When I was studying in college and studying Newton's first law and second law, etc., if somebody had told me that you will sign in the same book where Newton has signed after becoming fellow of Royal Society, I would not have believed it, as a matter of fact. So if you aim at Everest, at least you will reach Kanchenjunga. But if you aim at Kanchenjunga, you will stay where you are, basically. So keeping the aspirations high is number 1. Number 2 is particularly for the young, like instant coffee, there is no instant success. All right. All my life, I'm 77 now, a few months older than Anil, by the way. I work 24/7. You asked me before we started, how do you do so many things, etc. 24/7, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, until I breathe my last, whenever the time comes. That's the second part. Third is purpose, perseverance, and passion. You have to have a big purpose in life, the North Star. Dhruva Tara apan Marathit म्हणतो त्याला. And for that, you have to devote yourself passionately. Okay? And then you have to also understand you will have failures. But you interpret fail, F-A-I-L, in a different way. You say first attempt in learning. Your best guru is your last mistake, as long as you learn from that. That is the second mantra that I have used in my life. The third is you keep on knocking on the doors of opportunity. They don't open. Then what do? Don't get frustrated. Open your new doors. I remember when I came back in 1976, the equipment, Weisenberg reorganometer, and Anil just now described how tough it was to get. It would take 2 years, basically. I changed my field. I created a new door of opportunity on modeling and simulation. And within 5 years, I got Bhatnagar Prize on that. Otherwise, had I said that, I would have been still there. So I think that is what the young people have to know. The very important point about lifelong learning is very important. In fact, the 100th convocation address of Banaras Hindu University, I titled as Dikshant ka matlab shikshant nahi hota. When you get your degree, that's not the end, that's the beginning. And particularly with the way knowledge is changing. And the last point is, I always say there is no limit to human achievement. There is no limit to human endurance, excepting the limit that you put on yourself. Just now we talked about pandemic. that Jyoti Kumari, that young 15-year-old girl, carried her father for 1,200 kilometers in 8 days. No this thing limit to one's endurance. So let me end by just particularly for the young people, let me tell them a little story. Our Bharatanta Professor Sienna Rao is my sort of mentor. Professor Sharma is my mentor, and so on and so forth. So when I became FRS, I was very happy. I called him. You know what was his response? Not bad. Then I became American Academy of Arts and Science. There are only 7 Indians from 1780. I thought he will be impressed. Again, his response was not bad. And then 1 or 2 more things happened. Each time he would say not bad. Then I got upset. I said, sir, what do I have to do to impress you? What he said that is my 5th mantra that I will. What he said was that, he said, Mashelkar, you are climbing on a ladder of excellence, which is limitless. The only limit is what you put on your head. So interpreting it differently, I would tell the young people that whatever you achieve in your life, you have to say, my best is yet to come. So my mantra is, you are in your 20s today. You'll be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and you will live for 100 years by the new generation. But each day you have to get up in the morning and say, my best is yet to come. And maybe today is the day when it will basically come. So these are my 5 Mashelkar mantras, which have actually helped me in my life. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to take 2 questions now. One, we have Prashant Trivedi, who is abroad. His question is, how do you as a scientist approach problem solving? And what do you feel are the biggest strengths of a scientific approach? Dr. Kakodkar, would you like to?
Well, yes, actually, see, I will answer this question purely from my perspective. And see, for me, you must have first a mission in life. For example, for me, atomic energy, and when I got in, there was the commercial nuclear power plants had just come on scene, and we were talking about doing the same thing in the country completely in a self-reliant way. Now that was the mission. And I remember when in early days, my first year or second year into bar, during tea time, after some serious work, we used to get into such kind of just to lighten up ourselves. We used to talk about your tea has come, so you'll say now my fuel has come, my coolant has come, my moderator had come. Some batata vada comes, so carbon is a good moderator. So batata vada became our moderator, and we started looking at even these kind of things, and as young children do, in terms of what a reactor looks like, or what are the ingredients of a reactor. So all I'm saying is that mission has to get deep into you, and everywhere you must breathe that mission, you must think that mission, you must dream that mission, and then you start identifying, to realize that mission, what is it that you have to do, and it sets up some hundreds of problems. Some of them you think you can get it done from X, Y, Z within your organization. Some of them you can get it done from A, B, C outside your organization, by either by buying or contracting or collaborating or whatever. But there will be always some which will be kind of left unattended. And I think you should have the courage and ability enough to say that those which remain unattended, I will do. Or for that matter, if you propose something, a large mission you have to always put forward before a group. And in a group, there are always people, when you scrutinize, you look at it from all angles. So as the American slang says, there is always a yeah, but, oh, what you're saying is good, but. And there may be some issue which may be technical, which may be non-technical, but that but is always there. And so this is where you have to sort of come through with your own strength that, well, no, but this is the way it has to be done. This is the way I will do it and show it to you that this will work. And I think scientist has to kind of attend to the problem at hand with that spirit. And when you start doing that, everything falls in place. I'm not saying that it's easy, but that is the way big things can be done. And all, well, that's the way it happened in PHWRs. That's the way it happened in HWR, which is a fully designed system, not implemented, unfortunately. And even now, I'm talking about such thing, although retired. So I don't execute anything, but I do interact with people. And so I have to now find people who will have the same kind of commitment as I have. And luckily, there are people. So things are happening. But I think to take science and technology forward, the key thing is you must have a mission, and the problem choice arises out of that mission. And regardless of how difficult it is, that must be attended to and solved. We must have that courage to do so. So that is how I look at science and technology. But this is, I must admit, this is not a general definition because, but this is the way I am built. Thank you.
Thanks. Doctor, I'm going to turn to another question from Mitesh Kenkre. I'll ask Dr. Mashelkar, what would be the one thing you would have done differently and why? If you had a choice, Dr. Mashelkar, what is one thing you would have done differently in your life and why? Maybe you would not do also, whatever.
Well, I have a sense that I'm, what shall I say, intolerant in many respects. Somehow or the other, I found that I've been harsh on people who do not measure up to standards of excellence. I think you must have witnessed that in the journey that we had till this was set up also. And I think inadvertently I might have hurt people in sort of doing that. I think I would have sort of handled it sort of somewhat differently. There is a way of doing it. For example, saying simply that could we have done it better, and getting sort of an answer, because somehow or the other I'm very passionate, very possessed, so as to say, once there is an objective, and that has to be achieved in a particular timeline, etc. Now that I have actually matured and I think back, as a matter of fact, I would have sort of handled it bit differently. So something that sort of worries me over a period of time as I have moved with a, what shall I say, a relentless pace.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar. Last question, I must give the ladies a chance. So I will ask Dr. Anil Kakodkar the last question for the evening. How do we teach to keep learning? You mentioned about lifelong learning. I mean, so this question from Anuradha Goyal is, how do we teach to keep learning?
Well, I think one part of education is to maintain curiosity at the highest level in our minds, all of us. And if all of us, as a part of the education that we pursue, all of us are driven by our own curiosities, then I think that will drive you to learn whatever that curiosity arises. And there are many people who change tracks midway in their life. Unfortunately, the number of such people in India is less compared to similar thing happening elsewhere. And that is a reflection on the education system that we pursue. If you nurture curiosity in human mind, I think people will automatically become lifelong learners. That's how I see. So I think right from, my mother was a Montessori teacher. And what I learned from her was to kind of never accept something because it is said that, this is the right thing. You keep questioning. And that, if that habit remains in with you all your life, I think you automatically become a lifelong learner.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mashelkar and Dr. Kakodkar, for sharing your thoughts and your genius today. It has been absolutely a fascinating evening. We are leaving this session absolutely inspired, curious, and motivated. In one of the pre-sessions, Dr. Mashelkar said to me, we should look at 2020 as the end of a decade of hope, not as a year of despair, as we move into the new decade and new beginnings. With that, I thank you all for being with us today. We got a fantastic audience and wish you all a good evening. Wish you all a very happy festive season, happy holidays, and wish you a very happy 2021.